Japan House Los Angeles presents the Rethinking of Ma webinar series. Ma is a very common word in Japanese. It can be pronounced in many ways, such as ken, kan, aida, ai, awai, and hazama, indicating the different meanings. It also connotes various key terms like human, space, comrade, day or night, year or month, or period by being combined with other characters. Ma is a very important word among Japanese to communicate with each other and to express ways to address the world. Ma literally means space, or gap, interval, distance, or period of time, duration, interval. We can see this meaning graphically in the original ancient character as it depicts both a gate and the moon in between. Ma is thus literally the empty space defined by the gate where moonlight is shining through. Yet, how do we experience Ma? We can see it literally represented by the Shinto torii gate and the space in between. Moreover, we can see that in Japan, space is thought to be a planar two-dimensional compound, not space as the sense of an enclosed three-dimensional volume conceived in Western culture. Depth is created by a combination of planes. Meaning is derived from the junction of two dimensions with several axes of time. So we can experience this sense of Ma in walking through the series of gates shaped by the particular moment in time, such as in the autumn as the yellow ginkgo leaves have fallen to the ground. In walking through the gates, the light is ever changing, offering different views at each interval. Ma is experienced progressively through intervals of spatial designation or intervals of moments in time. In this sense, it integrates time and space together. This notion of time and space, represented by Ma, can be found in many forms of Japanese culture, such as architecture, garden design, painting, music, performance, martial arts, literature, and daily life, creating its foundation. In 1978, renowned architect Arata Isozaki presented this notion in the interdisciplinary Ma, Space-Time in Japan exhibition as the unifying concept of Japanese artistic culture and introduced Ma to the international cultural and intellectual scene. Here, this indigenous notion of order and orientation underscored the simultaneity of time and space in a global context and has become one of the most famous conceptual keywords from Japan. Nearly half a century has passed since the original Ma exhibition. In our era of the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond, our notions of time and space have certainly taken on new dimensions, with a reorientation of living and public space between local and global contexts. The impact of technology is transforming traditional relationships among time and space, and our life is on a new frontier. Is the notion of Ma still relevant to address the multiple forms of Japanese culture popular around the world? Or has Ma taken on new meanings? Can Ma be a critical notion to give us clues to understand the new conditions we are facing now? We thus present the Rethinking of Ma webinar series to contemplate these questions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. I'm Yuko Kaisu, President of Japan House Los Angeles, and it's our pleasure to welcome you to today's very special program. It is the fourth and final webinar in our series, Rethinking of Ma, developed by Professor Hitoshi Abe and Professor Ken Oshima to explore the concept of Ma, time and space, in different aspects of culture and life. Our previous webinars discussed Ma in media art, architecture, and gastronomy. In today's webinar, we will meet Japanese filmmaker Ryūsuke Hamaguchi and learn about his highly acclaimed new film, Drive My Car. Then director Hamaguchi will join Professor Abe and Professor Oshima to discuss the role of Ma in his film. Now, I'm very happy to introduce our guest, film director Ryūsuke Hamaguchi. Director Hamaguchi was born in Kanagawa, Japan in 1978. After graduating from the University of Tokyo, he worked in the film industry for a few years before entering the graduate film program at the Tokyo University of the Arts. His films include the documentary series Tōhoku Trilogy, co-directed by Ko Sakai, which were made in the wake of the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami. Happy Hour, Asako 1 and 2, Wheel of Fortune, and Fantasy, and many others. Many of his films garnered international recognition at various film festivals. His latest film, Drive My Car, based on a short story by Haruki Murakami, won the Screenplay Prize at Cannes in 2021 and is Japan's entry for Best International Film for the 2022 Academy Awards. Thank you, Director Hamaguchi, so much for joining us from Tokyo.
Yeah,
Thank
you for inviting me.
Thank you. And serving as his interpreter today is Ms. Aiko Masubuchi. Director Hamaguchi, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on the great recognitions and accomplishments of your films. You have received so many international recognitions, particularly the Drive My Car, being on the short list for the Best International Feature Film at the 94th Academy Awards. Mm-hmm. Last year in December, the Los Angeles Film Critics Association named Drive My Car as Best Picture and the best screenplay of the year. More recently, the film also won Best Foreign Language Film at the 79th Golden Globe Awards. It is so amazing and exciting. Well, I know that you will get into discussion on with the Professor Abe and Professor Oshima later, but let me first ask you some questions about your film and yourself. First of all, of course, it's just before the announcement of the nomination of the Academy Awards, which will be on the February the 8th, and the Academy Awards will be March the 27th. And how are you feeling about it?
Yeah, thank you for everything what you said. But please let me speak in Japanese from now on. まず本当にこちらお招きいただいてありがとうございます。この時間とても楽しみにしていたので嬉しく思っています。で、このアメリカでとても受け入れられている状況、ドライブ・マイ・カーが受け入れられている状況っていうのは本当に想像していなかったことなので、これはとても驚いています。アカデミー賞のことが言われますけれども、でも本当にこればっかりは成り行きっていうことがありますので、どうなってみるかはわからない。ただ本当に今の時点で十分に評価をいただいているっていうことを感じているし、このことによって観客が映画館に向かってこの映画を見てくれるっていうことが一番嬉しいことです。もしこれで何かが起きたらそれはご褒美みたいなものだと思っています。
So just to begin, I want to say truly thank you so much for the invite. I've been looking forward to this time with all of you. So thank you for inviting me. I honestly didn't imagine that this film would be accepted in the US in the way it has. So there's been a lot of surprises for me. And in terms of the Academy Awards, I'm sort of in the place where I think, well, what will be, and who knows what will happen. But I certainly feel that the film is getting praised in the US. And if that means that more audiences will go to the theater and watch this film, that makes me very happy. And I think if something were to happen with the Academy Awards, then it would be sort of the cherry on top of the cake.
Thank you so much. My next question is about Haruki Murakami. The Drive My Car is based upon a short story by Haruki Murakami. And it's not just one story, but you combined 3 different stories of his work. And why did you choose his work, and what was the process of it too?
はい。この村上春樹さんは20代の頃から、私も読んでいて、とても好きな作家でした。ただ、自分が、村上春樹さんの作品を映画化するっていうことは、あまりリアリティがないと。やっぱり世界的な大作家だったので、思ってたんですけれども、ある時にそのプロデューサーの方から、村上春樹さんの短編を、映画化しませんかということを言われました。これは村上春樹さんが短編であれば映画化の許可を出しやすいということがあったので、そのように提案をいただいたんですけれども、村上春樹さんの文章というのはごくごく単純に、今日の話とも関わるかもしれませんが、それこそ、リアルとファンタジーの間みたいなところがあって、すごく映像化をすることは基本的には難しいと思うんですね。で、ただこのドライブ・マイ・カーというのは、自分が読んでいた中でもとても好きな作品で、すごく、映像にする取っかかりがあるということを思いました。それは車っていう、その現実の中をちゃんと移動していく閉鎖空間みたいなものですね。ただ、これだけでは足りないっていうことがあったので、村上春樹さんの世界の独自性を保つために、村上さんの他の小説からいくつか要素を取ってきた。で、それでできたのがこのドライブ・マイ・カーと 映画ですね。
So I've always read Haruki Murakami's stories, especially in my 20s. He's an author that I've always respected and really liked. But it never felt like a real thing to imagine myself adapting his work. After all, Haruki Murakami is a world-renowned author, so it never felt real to me until one day, one of my producers came up to me and said, "Would you like to adapt a short story by Haruki Murakami?" And it was known that Haruki Murakami tends to allow short stories of his to be adapted. So the idea came about then. But the thing about Haruki Murakami's stories is that, simply put, a lot of his stories are about being in between reality and fantasy. And this, I think, is related to what we're about to talk about. But because of that, it's also very hard and difficult to adapt his stories. But Drive My Car personally was a story that I really liked. And I also felt that it was apt for adaptation into film, mainly because of the presence of the car being a closed space, an enclosed space that moves through real spaces. There's a physicality to that. But at the same time, I always knew that it's a short story and therefore I needed more elements to adapt into a feature film. However, I knew that Haruki Murakami's stories have a unique tone and atmosphere to them, so I couldn't just willy-nilly bring in whatever elements I wanted. So then I went towards other short stories by Haruki Murakami and brought in 2 of his other short stories into Drive My Car, and this is the result.
Thank you. I wonder if Mr. Murakami has seen your film, but I want to ask you one last question. So if you'd like to comment on that, please do so. But otherwise, I'd like to ask you about Hollywood film industry, or more generally, American film industry. I'm aware that you were influenced in your early years of work by American film director and actor John Cassavetes.
Yes.
So I want to learn a bit about your assessment or observation about the American film industry. And also you were talking about American audience loving your film and you were not quite sure why. But if you can tell us why you think that American people love Drive My Car.
です。その村上さんのこととも関わると思うんですけれども、アメリカでこんなに受け入れられている理由としては、やっぱり基本的にはこの村上春樹さんの小説世界の普遍性っていうものが根本にはあるんだというふうに思っています。で、特に今回は村上さんの長編では特に扱われているような、ある種の喪失があって、そこからどうやって希望を見出すかっていう、再生の物語っていう、その物語構造自体も強い普遍性を持っているということがあって、それが海を越えてアメリカの観客に受け入れられた原因なんではないだろうか。その世界観をある程度映画にするっていうことを、その責任がちゃんと果たせたのかなということを、まず思っています。
And I think in order to answer your question about the way that this film has been accepted in the US, I think is related to Haruki Murakami himself and his works. I think there is a universality to the works that Haruki Murakami creates. And I think specifically with this work, Drive My Car, there's this idea of loss that happens, and then this idea of restart and how to find hope after this loss. And I think this is a theme that he often deals with in a lot of his novels, but it's very much here in Drive My Car, and it's very much a universal structure that's already there in Drive My Car. And perhaps that has something to do with how it's been accepted universally in a way. And I think I was able to actually present this idea, and that success might have led to the fact that this film has also been accepted in the US.
はい。で、そのハリウッド、アメリカ映画っていうことに関して言うと、自分が最もその影響を受けている、名前を挙げていただいたジョン・カサベテスというのは、本当に両義的な存在というか、ハリウッドで俳優をしながら、インディペンデントの映画作りをするっていう、本当に世界でもあまりいないような人だったと思うんですけれども、自分はその両面から影響を受けていると思います。そのハリウッドの映画自体も大好きですし、彼のインディペンデントな映画の作り方っていうものにずっと勇気づけられてきて、で、この間本当に生まれて初めて LA に降り立ったんですけれども、これがジョン・カサベテスたちがいた仕事をしていた街かというふうに思うと、やっぱり非常に興奮するところがありました。ぜひまた訪れたいと思っています。はい。
So in response to your question about Hollywood and US films, the biggest influence for me, as you mentioned, is John Cassavetes. And he was both an actor and director. He was successful at both. And he was an actor in Hollywood, but then also made independent films. And I think I've been influenced by both of the work that he did. The independent directing that he did, I'm very much influenced by as well. And quite recently, I went to LA for the first time. And to think that that was the town that he was working in made me very excited. And I really want to go back and visit again.
We certainly hope that you would
I
soon.
hope so.
So now it's time to introduce our regular and our favorite host for today's webinar and begin exploring the concept of Ma in film with director Hamaguchi. Hitoshi Abe is professor in the Department of Architecture and Urban Design of UCLA. Ken Tadashi Oshima is professor in the Department of Architecture at the University of Washington. Hitoshi and Ken, thank you for the wait. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Yuko-san, and then nice to meet with you, Hamaguchi-san. Hello, everybody, to Rethinking of Ma at the Japan House, and thank you very much for joining us. Since we have a very special guest today, we decided to change our usual format slightly. Typically, we ask our guests to make a statement about their understanding of Ma at the beginning, and then the short presentation of their 3 projects will follow. But instead, we will divide today's talk into 2 sessions, and in each session, Ken and I will present about the idea of Ma we found in the movie, Drive My Car, from our own perspective. And then the conversation with the Hamaguchi-san will follow. So I will be in charge of first session using Japanese, since I really want to speak with him directly. And Ken will initiate second session in English. So let's first session begin. それじゃあ浜口監督、今日はよろしくお願いいた
よろし
します。
くお願いします。ありがとうございます。
いつもと立場が逆でですね、映画をお撮りになったご本人の前で、その映画についての間について語るという設定はですね、結構緊張しております。まあでも早速浜口さんが監督をされたドライブ・マイ・カーに僕が感じた間についてお話ししたいと思います。
I have to say, first of all, that to be presented with you, a special guest right here, and to be talking about my thoughts on Ma in your film right in front of you does make me quite nervous, but I'm going to begin anyway and look forward to talking.
僕が感じましたこの映画の間は、フィクションと現実の間という間です。この映画を拝見して興味を持ったのは、映画にさまざまなストーリーが重ね合わせられているということでした。
What kind of Ma that I felt in your film is this space Ma between fiction and reality. And I also felt that there were many layers of stories that were present in your film.
そもそも村上さんの3つのお話を組み合わせたシナリオだというふうにお聞きしてましたけど、その上に音の音物語であるとか、家福の演じる五道を待ちながらという劇、車の中で流れる朗読ですとか、あるいは台本読みのワークショップ、あるいはチェホフのワーニャおじさん、意図的に多くのストーリーが層をなすように作られているように思いました。
And of course, you mentioned that there are 3 short stories by Murakami that exist in the film, the screenplay as a story there, but then there's also the stories that are told in bed through the character Otto, as well as the play Waiting for Godot that Kafuku plays. And then there are readings that happen in the car, as well as readings that are done in workshop. And then there's Chekhov's Uncle Vanya. There's so many layers of stories that exist here.
演者の語りとか、録音されたテープ、劇中劇、多国籍言語、演劇、それから感情移入をしないで繰り返す台本読みなど、なんか意味の伝達精度の違うストーリーが重ねられることで、演者と演じられる役とか、演じられるストーリーの関係性がすごい曖昧になって、現実とフィクションの境界が浸潤し合っているような独特の空間を僕は感じました。
In terms of there's these performances that are happening on stage, but then there's the multilingual play elements. And then there are these readings that are happening without emotions included and all of these things. And they're have a differing degree of accuracy in the transfer of information that is happening. And through that, I felt that there is an ambiguousness that is happening there. The boundaries between reality and fiction are sort of seeping into one another. And that creates a unique tone and atmosphere that I felt.
で、加えて台本読みのプロセスやワークショップが浜口さんの実際の映画の制作プロセスに用いられるということを聞いて、この映画がフィクションと現実の間をつなぐような構造を持つんじゃないかっていうふうに個人的に考えました。
And I heard that you actually do these kinds of readings that we see in the film in your actual production. You have people do these rehearsals where they do these readings. And so in learning that, I felt that that process in itself also blurs the boundary between reality and fiction.
僕がいる建築の世界だと、ワークショップはまだ建てられる前の建物について住民たちと共有できるストーリーを作って、建物ができた時にはその空虚な箱物じゃなくて住民たちが住みこなせる生きた建物になるってことを目指したりします。デザインというフィクションと建物という現実、その間にもう一つのストーリーを挟むことでフィクションと現実を橋渡ししようとするわけです。
In the world of architecture, which is where I'm from, what we do in workshops is that before we build the actual building, we tell stories, we tell fictitious things, but that actually leads to a non-fictitious room, a room that actually exists. So therefore, we start from a place of fiction, which is design, but then we are trying to get to a place of reality, which is the building itself. And in between what we have here is a story of fiction that we tell in order to bridge that gap.
この映画もフィクションと現実をつなぐいくつもの位相に位置するいろんなお話がちょうど神社の入り口にあるいくつもの鳥居が立ち並んでいるような空間のように積層した構造を持っているような気がします。そしてフィクションと現実の間を結ぶことで生きられる映画というかそういうものを作り出そうとしてるんじゃないかというふうに思ったんです。
And so I believe that there are many stories in your film that are then combining reality and fiction, sort of like the way the torii gates of a Shinto shrine, as we see in the picture, that you creates a bridge between fiction and reality, and we're connecting fiction and reality. And I felt that by doing so, you are trying to create a living story, and that's sort of the impression that I got.
映画に象徴的なこの赤いサーブっていうのがその現実とフィクションを結ぶ間の空間を走り抜けていくように見えてました。で、今日はまずこの映画というメディアにおいてのその現実とフィクションについて、その間について浜口さんにお聞きするというところからお話を始めたいと思いますので、よろしくお願いします。
And I felt that the red sob within the film is a kind of space, a ma that exists, that is driving through, that's running through the space between fiction and reality. So in our talk today, I would love to start with the part of talking about this space, this ma between reality and fiction.
安倍さん、プレゼンテーションありがとうございます。こんなお手間をかけてしまってすいませんが、でも本当にこうやって、自分の映画について誰かが考えて何かを言ってくださるっていうことほど、ありがたいことはないなということを思います。その間に関して、あまり概念的に考えたことはなくて、ただ撮影現場では本当によく使う言葉ですね。もうちょっと間を取ってくださいとか、ここもうちょっと間を空けてください。そのプラクティカルに使う側面からいろいろ話せたらということは、今日全体としては思っているんですけれども、ひとまずちょっと、せっかくプレゼンテーションしていただいたことに、もうできるだけちゃんとお答えしようと思います。
Thank you so much for spending the time to prepare this presentation, and to hear about somebody's thoughts on my film is a great thing. And thank you so much for sharing this. I have to say, regarding this concept of ma, I've never really thought about it conceptually necessarily, but so I'd like to sort of talk about ma as a practical use, because that's something that I've been thinking about and really love to do my best in answering your questions.
このフィクションと現実の間っていうことを言っていただきましたけれども、これはもう映画を撮っていると、映画っていうのはもうそもそも本当にそういうものなんだっていう気持ちになるわけですね。で、これは映画を作る、特にカメラを使って映画を作るその最小単位としてショットっていうものがあります。ただこのショットっていうのが、そもそも区切ることであるわけですね。それは何を区切るかというと、空間と時間を区切るっていうことです。まずフレームによって空間を、どこか、マスクをかけるようにして 区切らなくてはいけない。そしてもう一つ、そのカメラの回し始めと回し終わりがあって、時間を区切らなくてはいけない。どこからどこまでを区切るかっていうことが、でもこの監督の仕事だと言ってもいいと思います。
So I think this idea of Ma presents itself in the shooting of the film itself. So when making a film, we use a camera, and at the very smallest element of the shot that is happening when we use a camera. And to shoot a shot means to put a period to both time and to space. By using the frame, what we're doing is that there is a masking that happens because we're slicing up the space within the frame. We're creating a period. And then there's also a cut in time as we start the camera and then call cut. There is a cut that happens in the time. And I believe that the director's work is to decide where those periods happen.
はい。で、この作業をするときに、どうしてもそこに、現実とフィクションの狭間が、すでに発生するっていうところがあります。っていうのは、カメラは、人間の知覚能力よりはるかに優れた記録能力、その工学的なオプティカルな記録能力を持っているわけですね。なので、人間が知覚する以上にも現実そのままの、視覚的な記録っていうものがなされてしまう。で、一方で、ただこれは、その現実のすべてを記録することはできない。現実をある断片、空間的、時間的な断片としてしか捉えることができないっていうところがあります。なので、現実そのものではないわけですね。言ってみれば、その証拠映像として裁判に出そうとしたときに、フレームの外側であるとか、そのカメラが回し始める前に、何が起きているかわからないわけなので、そこには常にフィクションの可能性がある。何か騙されている可能性みたいなものがあって、このショットを撮るっていう映画の最小単位の中にすでにフィクションと現実っていうものが存在しているっていうことです。
面白い。
And I think doing this kind of work, the space between reality and fiction always appears. After all, the camera, an amazing device that is able to record optically reality of very high caliber, much better than a human being can record. And it's recording reality visually. However, at the end of the day, it's contained and confined within what it can capture. And therefore, it's not reality itself that the camera is capturing. It's only capturing a part of that reality. And so, for example, if we were to use video footage as proof in court, there's always the things that are happening outside of the frame, outside of the time that it has recorded. And therefore, that element of fiction always exists. There's always this element that it could be false, that there's fiction there, that something could be a lie. In that sense, fiction is always present.
ってことは、ドキュメンタリーでも、作られてるいわゆるもうめちゃめちゃファンタジーの映画でも、それはリアリティとそのなんていうんですか、フィクションの常に曖昧な境界の中にあり得るってことなんですか？
そうです。まさにそうです。
So what you're saying is that whether it's a documentary or whether it's an extremely fictitious, fantastical film, there always remains this ambiguous space of reality and fiction coexisting. And Ryusuke said, yes, I agree.
で、フィクション、劇映画を作るっていうことは、この特徴をこの断片でしかないっていうところの特徴を利用して作るものです。この断片と断片を組み合わせて、現実とは全く違うもう一つの現実みたいなものを作り上げていくのが劇映画の作業。それをフィクションと呼ぶと思うんですが、劇映画の作業になります。
And this idea of making fictitious films, fiction films, that work itself is to use these fragments that we have and then put them together and make new realities out of these fragments. And I think that is the work of making fiction films.
ただ、この時に劇映画っていうのは演じる体を捉えるわけですけれど、この時にそのカメラの記録能力っていうものと、演技のある種の不可能性みたいなものが、喧嘩をすることがあるわけですね。演技をしている人は絶対にそのキャラクターではなくて、普段言わないことを言ったりやったりして、その時に、必ず体には、ある違和感みたいなものが生じてくる。普段この人こんなこと言わないよね、やらないよねっていうことを、カメラは人間以上の知覚能力で捉えてしまうというところがあります。なので、このフィクションを作ろうとしたときに俳優の体っていうものがそのフィクションを破壊するように働くっていうことが、あるわけです。
However, in making fiction films, it's also capturing the bodies of the performers themselves who are in front of the camera. And as I mentioned, the camera has these recording abilities, but in some ways there is a clash or conflict that is happening against the actors' bodies themselves, because these actors are performers and they're doing things or saying things that they may not necessarily say in real life. And no matter how good of an actor they are, I think at the end of the day, that body shows that sense of discomfort in some way or another. There's a mark of that discomfort of the actor saying or doing things that they might not usually say. And I think in that sense, what the camera is doing and this idea of fiction is up against the reality of the actor's body showing these things. And there's a clash that happens between that fiction and reality.
この問題は結局解決しようがない問題なんですけれども、ただ、演技っていうものにはやっぱりまだある種の神秘がある、謎がある。はっきり言うと素晴らしい演技というのを見ると、全くもってこの人はその人でないことはもうみんな知っている、明らかなんだけれども、まさにこの人はそんな人なんじゃないだろうかっていう、そういう次元の演技っていうものが存在したりするわけですね。で、その時に、自分にとってはそういう演技を起こりやすくする一つの拠り所っていうのが、テキストであるっていうことです。それが本読みにもつながっている。
And so this problem, this issue is not something that can just be solved. But at the end of the day, I do think they're in acting and in performance, they can be brilliant performances where we know that these are performers and that they are playing a role. However, yet we completely forget this fact and think that maybe they are who they are on the screen. And they start to enter a very different realm when that brilliant performance happens. And the place that I lean towards in order to make these things possible is the text itself, and that leads to this idea of readings that I do.
この本読みの作業にもおそらくテキストと身体の間みたいなものがあって、テキストっていうのは必ず意味があるわけですね。で、その意味っていうのはただ一つとは限らなくて、多様な意味がある。ただ、まずい演技っていうのは、そこからたった一つの解釈っていうのを固定して選んでしまうというか、悲しかったら悲しく演技するとか、嬉しかったら嬉しく演技するっていうことを、想定して演技をしてしまう。そうすると、ここでは本当にただ、悪い意味でのフィクションしか映らなく、演技としては映らなくなってしまうということがあります。それを避けるために本読みがある。
And to speak more about the reading process, I think there is also this space that happens between text and the body that is saying the text. And the thing about text is that it always has meaning, but that meaning is not always singular. There's always often many interpretations, many meanings that exist behind the text. And I think that bad performance or bad acting is when only one interpretation is present there, where the performance just interprets that text to be sad and just acts sad. And this one-dimensional acting, I think, leads to bad fictional acting. And so the reading process is about avoiding that.
で、この本読みの作業の時に、無感情なまま何度も読んで、そのテキストを記憶するっていうことをやるんですけど、これは、どういうことだと今自分が考えているかというと、テキストを多義的なまま体に保存するっていうことです。いろいろ、そのテキストの可能性っていうものは、あるわけなんだけど、読みの可能性はあるわけなんだけれども、それを無解釈に、まずちょっと受け入れてみようと。で、それがいつ決定されるかっていうと、これは俳優と俳優の間で決定されるっていうことですよね。俳優と俳優がそのテキストをどう言うか。で、そのテキストを口にしたことに応じて、その相互作用が生じて、その場限りの演技っていうものが生じることがあるのではないだろうかと思っていて、そうすると、さっき言ったような明らかにフィクションだとみんな分かっているし、これも何だったら書き言葉のセリフなんだけれども、この2人の間で起きていることには何か本当のことがあるのではないかって思うような、そのフィクションとリアリティの現実の間みたいなものが生じるような気がしています。ひとまずここまで。
面白い。
And so in doing these readings, what I have my actors do is to read without including emotion, without emoting, and ask them to read the text over and over and memorize the text without emoting. And what I think about this process these days is that what I'm asking is for the actors to memorize the text whilst including and keeping intact the many meanings and many interpretations that the text can have. I'm asking them to not interpret what the text actually means. And the moment that that meaning is actually decided, that moment is actually when the actor is responding to another actor. It's when these actors are saying the text to each other. And that is when they can react to the text. And through that, there's a combustion that happens through this interaction. And therefore, it can create a performance that feels like it can only happen that one moment because they're reacting to each other in that moment. And I think that's when acting, where even though we know it's fiction, even though we know it's performers who are performing these roles, we somehow forget that and are drawn into the acting, even though we know that these words are also quite literal. And I think through this process creates this space between fiction and reality is created yet again.
ありがとうございます。すごい面白いですね。結局、ストーリーと、フィクションとしてのストーリーと、あるリアリティとしての演者の身体性みたいなものをどう折り合わせて、でしかもそれが生きられた空間というのか、そういう場を作って、そこに違うレベルの、リアリティであり、違うレベルのフィクションを作り出していこうかっていうふうに考えたとすると、ちょっと個人的に実はもう時間がないのでこれしか聞けないんですけどなんか日本のよく聞くのは日本の役者の持ってる身体性とか表現の仕方と、アメリカの役者の表現の仕方が全然違うっていう話を聞くんですが、もしその演者の身体性っていうものが違ってるとすると、このやり方っていうのはやっぱり変わっていくんでしょうか。監督のもしアメリカでこれを撮ろうとしたときに、やっぱり変わるんでしょうか、そのやり方は。
I found that a conversation, what you just said, to be really interesting. This idea of fiction, which is the story, and then reality, which is the physical body, and how you then work together with these two, and how you create a living space out of using these two, fiction and reality. And through that, how you create different levels of reality, new levels of reality, new levels of fiction. I found that to be really interesting. I'm running out of time, so this is the only question that I'm able to ask. But what I want to ask is that I often hear that Japanese actors and American actors perform very differently, perform at a physical level. And so I'm wondering, if you were to perhaps shoot this film in America, would you direct differently because of the way that actors may act differently?
はい、これはですね、本当にその時になってみないとわからないっていうのが、実際のとこではあるんですよね。このアメリカと日本の役者が違うというか、アメリカ人と日本人の文化が違い、その身体性が違うっていうのは間違いがないことだと思います。ものすごく単純化すると、アメリカ人はやっぱりある程度開放的で、日本人はより抑制的だっていう、そういう肉体の傾向を持っていると思います。まず。
You know, to be honest, at a very fundamental level, I really won't know until I actually try it. But at the end of the day, I do think that more so than American and Japanese actors being different, I think they're different cultures, and therefore it results in different physical expressions. And if I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, perhaps there is a sense that American physical movement is much more open in a way, and oftentimes Japanese movement is more repressed.
ただ、普通にそのアメリカ人にも友人ができたりして分かることは、アメリカ人だって思っていることを全部言ってるわけではないっていうことですよね。その社会の行動の中で言っていいことと言ってはいけないことがあって、それはその日本人と違うっていうだけなんだと。そういう点で日本人であろうとアメリカ人であろうと、ある種その社会に自由に出せない自分自身がいるっていうこと自体は変わらないとは思うんですけれども、日本の方がよりちょっとウェイト&シーっていうんですかね、もう状況を見てから自分を出すけれども、アメリカの方がより先手を打って出すっていうところがあると思います。で、それにどう対応するかっていうのは自分はまだわからない。これはやってみないと多分本当にわからないことです。日本語に関してはやっぱり正確なある種の判断基準。今彼はなんか恥ずかしいんだなとか、なんかやりたくないんだなっていうことが、その都度その都度分かったりするけれど、アメリカに関してはまだその辺のなんか自分の中での解釈が全く分からないので、同じように演出ができるかと言われるとちょっと分からないっていう感じですね。
But that all said, I have friends from the US, and what I know now is that in the US, there are also people who feel that they can't say whatever they want to say while they live in society. I think that's true of both America and Japan. I think wherever people are, there are things that people can't feel that they cannot say due to social norms and social codes, and they can't be necessarily the person that they want to be or just openly say whatever they're thinking. But that all said, I do think that there is a sense of wait and see when it comes to Japanese people. They sort of assess the situation before they actually say something, as opposed to, I often encounter a lot of people in the US who go ahead and say what they think before this waiting that happens often with Japanese people. With that said, I still won't really know how I would actually direct if I were to direct with US actors. But I can say that I think when I'm working with Japanese actors, I do have a sense of feeling, knowing when to make the decision, knowing what my own interpretations are of the actors, whether to think, oh, at this point, the actor should feel embarrassed because of this and that. And because of my own understanding of the culture, I'm able to say these things and make that decision. However, I still don't know if I have enough of a grasp with the US culture to be able to do the same thing necessarily.
ありがとうございます。きっとそんな機会がすぐにできることを楽しみにしています。じゃあ次にもうケンが待ってるので、ケンに今度パスしますので、どうもありがとうございました。
ありがとうござい
Well,
ます。また
I'm sure that day will come soon, and I look very much forward to it. Thank you very much. And now it's time for Ken's talk.
So this conversation is certainly on many levels, as is the film, and multilingual, multi-layered, and one that be frustrated to ask all of the questions. Already we have some 22 questions and very little time, but to really give you a sense of the film, we're going to show some clips to really get a sense from Hamaguchi-san's eyes how this is really playing out, and this creation of Ma through the medium of film. And of course, as we've been discussing, the short story of Murakami's combined with the two others, while the short story was originally 40 pages, 3 hours in the film really doesn't seem that long, perhaps. And unfortunately, we can't have our webinar for 3 hours, so I won't prolong this, but you'll probably notice that my Ma is red versus Hitoshi's Ma that was yellow. And like the novel that was featuring a yellow sob, here we have a red Saab 900, one of the classics, and that becomes a real protagonist for the film. And we'll see it come alive through the clips, but how this sense of space-time plays out, as Hitoshi was mentioning, a series of gates, we can kind of see here in the bridge behind me, as you'll note as we see, but the positioning of our protagonist of Yusuke Kafuku being the driver versus being the passenger, how that changes. But also with the Saab, it's a foreign car in Japan. The handle is on the left side versus on the right side. So there are these kind of negotiations between cultures and landscapes, cityscapes that I think we'll see. So we have 3 sets. First is from the beginning of the film, where we're set in Hiroshima, which is different from the novel, which originally is in Tokyo. But then a series of clips that take us over the bridge, through tunnels, both night and day, and then through the seasons, as we'll see. To start us off, just a few comments about this scene in terms of Ma, or the thinking behind the filmmaking that's in motion, and in some ways like the director's cut DVD, where you get some of this live commentary. So Hamaguchi-san, よろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。どっから言ったらいいのか。一番簡単な話からすると、左ハンドル。これは、ご存知の方多いと思いますけど、日本は、日本車は基本的に右ハンドルなんですけれども、サーブはスウェーデン製の車なので、これは左ハンドルなんですね。で、これはよく特別な意味があるのかということを聞かれるんですけれども、日本で外国車を買うと左ハンドルになるんです。で、それは日本では、ある種のステータスといったらなんですけれども、ちょっと人とは違うんだよっていうところを示すサインのようなものにもなっている。だということを、一番簡単なところで
I'm having a hard time thinking about where to really begin, but I'm going to start somewhere easy, which is about your comment on the fact that the driver's seat is on the left side. And as you mentioned, in Japan, most cars are on the right side. However, the Saab is a Swedish car, and therefore the handle is on the left. And I'm often asked whether there's a special meaning behind this choice. And the answer really is that when you buy foreign cars in Japan, often the handle is on the left. That in some sense can indicate a sort of status. People can use that as a status sign to say that, I'm a little bit different from the ordinary.
で、一番最初にご覧いただいたシークエンスは、東京から広島へと下腹が移動していくっていうことなんですけれど、これが示しているのは移動ですよね。で、自分がドライブ・マイ・カーが映画になるって感じたのも、この移動が取れるからだと思います。この距離っていうものが具体的に踏破されるというか、距離が具体的に走行されることによって、ごくごく単純に観客は空間の広がりっていうものを感じる。ここではないどこかへ向かっていく。そういう車っていうものを通じて空間の広がりっていうものを感じられるようになる。で、それことは、まずとても強い、現実的な、アンカーというんですかね、重しみたいなものだというふうに思いました。観客に対して強い現実感、強い空間の感覚をまず与えてくれるものだと思いました。
Regarding this first sequence that we just saw, it's where Kafuku drives from Tokyo to Hiroshima. There's movement that's happening from Tokyo to Hiroshima, and this idea of movement that is very much present. And that's something that was present in Drive My Car, the original story to begin with. And that's why I even thought that I can adapt the story into a film, because of this existence of movement, there can be distance that can be seen and distance that's actually passed through. And therefore, through that, the audience can feel an enlargement of space getting vaster and vaster because of this movement through space. And I think by feeling that, it creates an anchor into reality for the audience. It's a real anchor for the audience to feel a sense of reality by feeling that space enlarge.
So I wonder if you could further comment about some of these passages in what comes to mind as the director.
橋っていうのは、今、大島さんの背景の画像にも橋が映ってますけど、この車をどこを走らせるかっていうのは、やっぱり選ばなくてはいけない。そして非常に難しい問題。それは背景をどうするかっていう問題があるんですね。で、その時に、結局自分がこういう橋を選んでしまうっていうのは、でもやっぱり多層性っていうことなんだと思います。で、橋っていうのは、すごくわかりやすく、一つのレイヤーからもう一つのレイヤーに移動しているっていうこと。で、トンネルにもそれと近いところがあると思います。ただ、トンネルの方がさらに抽象的なところがあると思います。
So regarding the use of the bridge, Ken, you also have the bridge in your background of your screen. But when I'm thinking about these scenes where the car is driving, I have to make these choices of what is actually in the background, where the car is actually driving through. And the fact that I often use bridges, I think at the end of the day, has a relation to the fact that bridges are multi-layered. The bridge is very much going from one layer to another. And I think a similar thing can be said about a tunnel, but I think with a tunnel, there's something more abstract about it.
橋っていうのは、簡単に言えば、一望できるわけですね。一つのレイヤーがあり、もう一つのレイヤーに向かう運動があり、その先にはもう一つのレイヤーがあるっていうふうに見ることができる。それを一度に見ることができるのが、橋っていうポジションであって、トンネルっていうのはこれが目隠しをされている。で、どこを走っているかっていうことがわからない。で、その分、抽象度が非常に高い空間になっていると思います。後半に行くにつれ、トンネルの描写が増えていくように思うんですけれど、それは多分この映画のある種抽象度みたいなものがどんどん上がっていくということと対応しているし、その時に空間も時間もどこか凝縮されたものになっていくというか、例えばこのドライブ・マイ・カーの映画の中で、トンネルに入って、昼のショットからトンネルにつながって、そしたらもう夜になっているとか、晴れている空間からトンネルに入って出ると雨が降っているとか、トンネルを抜けるともうすでに何かが変わってしまっている。そういうところを選ぶようにしています。編集の時に選ぶようにしています。その時に、やっぱこのくぐり抜けることによって、役者たちの体、キャラクターたちも変わっていってるし、おそらくそれが観客にも届く、その変化になるのではないかと思って、こういうふうにしているのではないかなと思います。自分で。はい。
The thing about a bridge is that it's sort of a lookout point. You can see from one layer to another. It's of course connecting from one layer to another, but you can also see out into where that layer goes to, which is a layer that is beyond the bridge. And you can see all of that when you're on a bridge. However, when we're talking about a tunnel, a lot of things are hidden. You're sort of blindfolded in a way. You can't see really where it's going. You can't see what's outside of that. And I think these shots with the tunnel happen further into the story. And as the story in the film also gets more abstracted, and you're wondering where things are going within the story as well. And I think by the time a lot of tunnel scenes appear, time and space is much more concentrated together. So some of these tunnel scenes, oftentimes it would start with daytime and then they'll enter a tunnel. And by the time they come out of the tunnel, it's nighttime. Or sometimes it's sunny and then it's a tunnel and then it's rainy when they come out. There are these drastic changes that are happening before and after the tunnel. And I did make these choices in the edits to express a change in the actors' physical bodies, but also a change therefore in the audience, so that the audience can feel that a change had happened through going through the tunnel.
In giving this sense of a different season, especially winter with the snow, how that gives a sense of a different sound quality, but also character to this. And Kafku is, again, in the passenger side, but giving this kind of contrast of the red against the white, and one that does give us this sense of whole progression. But just some final thoughts in terms of this last clip.
ありがとうございます。まあ、自分自身もこの場面はとても気に入っているというか、本当に、まあ、その物語もキャラクターも、まあ、研ぎ澄まされていっているというか、そういう感覚があります。で、なんで無音にしたんですかっていうことはよく聞かれるんですけれども、まあ、なんで無音にしたのかなって、まあ、よくその度に考えるんですけれど、一つは本当に雪の空間に入った時の自分の感覚、その雪が音を吸ってしまって、音がほとんどしない空間に入っていくっていう時のその感覚っていうものを強調するため。で、もう一つは観客に耳を休んでもらうためっていうことをよく言っています。この前にすごく大きなノイズが響いているので、この空間でこれから最も重要な会話っていうものが始まるので、そこで観客の集中力、観客の感受性、感覚っていうものを、まあ、一番高めておかないといけないっていうことをまあ思ってました。で、そのためにこの無音の空間っていうものが入ってきているっていうことがまずあると思います。
Thank you for your thoughts on this scene. I have to say this scene is one of my personal favorites as well. I really like this scene. And I think in this scene, both the story and the characters have been refined and sharpened at this point. I'm often asked why this scene has a lot of silence. And every time I'm asked this question, I have to think to myself, why is it? Why did I choose silence? And I think one of the answer to this is the fact that it's a snowy space. And my own physical experience of snowy spaces is that sound is often absorbed there. And it's related to what I feel of snowy spaces. But the other answer to this is that I'm also asking the audience to rest their ears for this scene, because before this scene, there's a lot of noise that is happening. But once we enter this space, this new scene, one of the most important conversation is about to happen. So I want the audience's own concentration to also be refined and to be open to new sensibilities as they enter into this scene.
ここに至るまでに、本当にこの映画をご覧になった方はもう分かると思うんですけど、本当にたくさんの言葉があるわけですね。本当にたくさんの言葉に埋め尽くされてここまで来た中で、最終的にこのような沈黙っていうのを一旦くぐり抜ける。で、彼らはある意味ではもう言うべきことをほぼ言ってしまった。でもそれでも最後に残った、本当に言うべきものみたいなものにたどり着くそのプロセスとして、このドライビングシーンっていうものがあるし、それがある種の目的地まで着いた。彼らが本当にたどり着くべきゼロ地点まで着いたっていうことを示すために、この場面っていうのはあるのではないかなと今思ってます。また変わるかもしれません。
People who have already seen this film would know that up to this point, the film is full of words. It's amassed with words. And until we get there, it's a lot of words until we get to this moment of silence. And it's this idea of passing through this silence. There's a sense that all that has been needed to be said has been said. I think in some ways they're arriving at a destination of some sort. They're arriving at a final point of some sort. And therefore, what is said at this point is something that what is only necessarily being said. And so that's sort of what I think about this scene right now, but I might change my opinion on this later as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We have 42 questions now that would take up another maybe 3 hours, but maybe we can have a few more minutes. And one that I think is very appropriate to this discussion of Ma is just the creation of the film during the period of COVID. I heard that 10 days after you started shooting Drive My Car, the cases of COVID were climbing dramatically in Tokyo. So you had to suspend shooting for 8 months. Wonder if this suspension or pause, the Ma, affected your filming or mindset as a director of this film.
この間はですね、本当に有効な間だったなっていうことを思っているということですね。このコロナ禍で本当に多くの方が大変だったと思うので、それはあくまで自分たちの制作にとって有効な時間だったとしか言えないですけれども、この多言語演劇っていうものを、準備をする時間っていうものが必要だった。でそれは自分たちが思っているよりも、ずっと複雑なプロセスが必要だったっていうことです。通訳の手配であったり、一人はその手話で演じなくてはいけないんですけれども、彼女は手話のネイティブスピーカーではないので、そのトレーニングをしたり、そういうその準備の時間っていうものが、実は元々のスケジュールではきっと足りなかった。元々想定していたスケジュールではむしろ現場が崩壊していたかもしれなくて、この8ヶ月間の中断期間っていうのは、我々に物事を始めるための適切な準備をする時間をくれたという感覚を持っています。
Well, this Ma that you just asked, to me, it was a very effective and important Ma this time that was created. Of course, through COVID, a lot of people have had difficult times. So I can only really speak for the fact of, for this production, it was an effective break that occurred. For example, the scenes with the multilingual play, we've realized that it takes much more preparation time than we originally anticipated. And we needed to figure out a different process than we initially thought. For example, the actor who does sign language, she's not native to sign language, so she needed time to train. So I have a feeling that if we had in fact stuck to the original schedule, that the production may have fallen apart. So that 8 months break actually ended up being something that was necessary and gave us the prep time that we really needed.
Thank you so
Ken-san,
much. Hi.
Do we have one more question? Do you have a time to go one more or not really?
Maybe one last question, although we have 49 questions, but if we were to ask one last question, then one that actually builds on what Hitoshi was raising between fiction and reality. And also, Hamaguchi-san is both the director and co-writer of the screenplay. So, there's a relationship between the writing and the film, as well as between the play and the film. And so the question is about what might have inspired you to bring together a sense of the stage and the screen all together.
でもこれは本当に今日の、一番大きな間の一つ、小説と映画の間みたいなことが、そのアダプテーションっていうことだと思いますけれど、基本的にやっぱり、特にその文学作品が優れていればいるほど、単に文章を置き換えるだけ、文章を映像に置き換える。これはその頑張ればできるわけですけれど、それではその文章が作り出している、ある種の感動みたいなものを味わうことはできなくて、映画は映画のやり方で、先ほど一番最初に話したような、そのカメラの特性、現実を捉えてしまう、そのカメラの能力っていうものを使いながら、小説をどう映画にする方法があるか。ということを考えていく必要があります。で、その時にそのテキストっていうものが重要だということをお伝えしたと思うんですけれど、中間的な存在としておそらく演劇っていうものが存在しているのではないだろうかと思います。
So I think the biggest Ma that is perhaps present here is the space between the original story and the film, the adaptation process. And the thing with adaptation is that the better the original text, the harder it is to adapt into a film, because of course it's easy to just convert the text right directly into the film medium. However, you can't necessarily then recreate the same kind of moving feeling that one may have felt through the original. The film won't be as moving in the same way. And so I have to think about, okay, I'm using a camera here that captures reality. And then now how do I adapt the original text into a film? And so, as I mentioned earlier, text is really important to me, but I think what stands in between the original text and then also a film is perhaps theater is an in-between space, somewhere in between these two.
その演劇っていうのは書かれたテキストを口にするっていう、特殊な行為なわけですよね。話し言葉ではないことを話すっていう、作業をひたすらする、場だと思うんですけれども、ただ一方でそれが、リアルに行われている場である。それが、正当化される場と言ったらいいんですかね。それをやっていても観客は不思議には思わない場だというふうに思います。で、この時に、ただ、でもどんな演劇でもいいかというと、きっとそうではなくて、やっぱりテキストの力っていうものがとても必要だったような気がしています。で、その時に、村上春樹さんが書かれたテキストっていうのはもちろん、ベースとしてあるとして、チェーホフっていうのは、本当に強い力を持っているということを思いました。先ほどテキストを役者の体に保存して、それがその相手との相互作用によって何か感情を引き出して出てくるんだっていうような話をしましたけれども、チェーホフのテキストを使った時に出てくるその感情の量っていうものが半端ない。半端ないっていうとあれですけれど、本当にすごい力を持ったテキストなんだっていうことをやりながら感じていました。で、チェーホフのテキストっていうものは、どこかその現実とフィクションっていうものの境を、まさになくしてしまうような、なんかそういう人々の体に直接訴えかけるような、そういう力を持っていたと。使ってみてですけれど思います。
And the thing about a theater is that the actors are often saying text that it is not necessarily colloquial words. It's sort of dialogue that is written for the theater. And that's a sense of reality that exists in theater. And it's interesting that in theater, it's a space where the audiences do not feel strange about hearing these words being said through performers on stage. And I think text at the end of the day is very important here. And it doesn't mean that it can be any theatrical piece that can have this kind of power. But in using Chekhov's text, I realized how much power it actually has, the text that Chekhov writes. I talked earlier about having the actors memorize the text and having the memorization seeped into their bodies, and then asking them to pull emotions out when they actually perform. But in using Chekhov's text, I really realized strongly the amount of emotion that Chekhov's text is able to bring out of the actors. I really felt that when I was working with Chekhov's text. And I felt that Chekhov's text really has the ability to almost make the boundary between fiction and reality disappear. It has the power to be able to do that.
Thank you so much. I think we're out of time, and I do encourage everyone to see the film if they haven't, or see it again.
Hold on. Let me also add that thank you very much for fantastic translation.
Absolutely.
Aiko-san. And you are great. And also there's so much sort of a great comment about your translation on the actually chat. So thank you. And thank you, Hamaguchi-san, again. For great talk.
So much.
I wish we had more time.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you so very much to all the speakers. Ryusuke-san, Hitoshi, Ken, you were excellent. Such an engaging, inspirational talks that you did today. And of course, Aiko, everybody on the chat box was commending and praising you. So thank you very much. I would also like to thank Site Shows and Janus Films for helping provide film content, and our promotional partners, Asia Society of Southern California and Japan American Society of Southern California, for promoting today's program through their networks. For those of you who haven't seen the film yet, it is screened in various locations in the United States. Please check out the official website of drivemycar.film. And I am sure that you didn't find it the spoiler, but this webinar must have enhanced the appreciation of the film. And also like to thank the audience so much for being actively engaged in the chat box and also sending in many, many questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't cover many of your excellent questions, but really appreciate your questions. Japan House Los Angeles is hosting many online and on-site programs in coming weeks and months. So please check out our website at www.japanhousela.com. also subscribe our newsletter so that you'll be updated about our programs. One thing that we are going to reopen our restaurant space on February the 23rd with the launch of the pop-up Wagyu Japanese beef dinner series. And we'll be taking your reservation soon. Ryusuke-san, sorry, Aiko-san, sorry, you're based in Japan, so you won't be able to be here in time for this pop-up, but you never know. We might be still having it in late March. So today, when you exit the program, please take a moment to fill out our survey so that we can continue providing high quality content that is relevant to your interest. Again, thank you so much, wonderful speakers, and Ryusuke-san, Director Hamaguchi. We're looking forward to seeing you again in Hollywood with the red carpet. So, thank you, and
ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。Thank you very much. Have a nice rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank
お疲れ様
you. ありがとうござい
Thank
ま
you
し
so much.
た
ありがとうございました。
皆さん本当にありがとうございました。